Today, I want to talk about the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment is a specific period of time in Western European history. And I want to focus on a specific aspect of the Enlightenment, the aspect of reason. Think about that word, reason. What does that mean? Well, somebody could be reasonable. If you think about what that means, reason, reasonable, it means thinking about what you're doing, considering, having consideration for circumstance, applying thought, applying ideas, applying philosophy. This is the age of reason, where people try to reason out, where people try to make reasonable propositions about the state of the world. And what I want to do is look at Enlightenment thinkers in the age of reason. Think also about the word enlightenment. People at large and specific groups of philosophers and scientists and thinkers were becoming more and more enlightened. We're enlightening each other, enlightening Europe, enlightening the world with their ideas and philosophy, all based on reason. So this age of the Enlightenment is the age of great thinkers, the age of great science, the age of philosophy. That's what's meant by the Enlightenment. That's what's meant by the age of reason. Now, we shouldn't say that this period of the Enlightenment, the period about 1750 to about 1850, is how I would characterize the Enlightenment. We shouldn't say that that's the only point that there were enlightened thinkers. Ever since the Renaissance, the ideas, thought, philosophy, science started to grow, started to be propagated, particularly with the printing press. Scientists, thinkers, and philosophers published and wrote continuously. But by the time we get to 1750, right up to 1800, this process of reason, enlightenment, science, and thinking starts to grow on an unprecedented scale. But let's just jump back to some of the first thinkers. Here is René Descartes. And in the 1600s, around 1650, Descartes wrote Meditations on First Philosophy, and he's noted for the famous saying, "I think, therefore I am." And that saying, "I think, therefore I am," translated into Latin as cogito ergo sum, really sums up the idea of reason. If we're to start to think about man's place in the world, what's man's purpose in the world? How can we know about the world? We need to start with a very simple idea. How do we know we exist? Well, Descartes answered that question with cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. I am a conscious being, so I must exist. And he moves on from there to discuss man's place in the world and the world as it holds together in the universe, and ideas about philosophy and science. Other writers around this time include Thomas Hobbes, who we've already discussed. Thomas Hobbes is famous for writing the work Leviathan, and Leviathan is an idea of how man should be governed. Here's the cover of Thomas Hobbes' work, Leviathan, and he says, "Leviathan, or the matter, form, and power of a commonwealth, ecclesiastical and civil." What he means by that is, let's think about how man should be governed. And his famous quote in this is that life is nasty, brutish, and short, therefore man should be governed with a strong king, a Leviathan. Well, do you agree with that? Should we all have one strong ruler or one strong government looking over the commonwealth, ecclesiastical and civil? Hobbes thought so, and as an enlightened thinker, he applied reason and discussed it in this book, which was published and discussed widely, leading to other philosophers to build on Hobbes' ideas. One of the most noted philosophers who continued this discussion of government, of philosophy, was John Locke. John Locke also discussed how man should be governed. What rights should man have? Should man have equal rights? Should man have rights to property? How can man's liberty be protected by a government? And instead of putting the emphasis on a strong government, John Locke put the emphasis on strong freedom, strong liberty for individuals. He turned it the other way and said individuals should be guaranteed their life and liberty. It's no surprise, therefore, that John Locke was very popular amongst the founding fathers of the United States. So we're coming up to this period, 1750 to 1800s, where there's so much of these ideas about government, about philosophy, about man and how man should be governed, and how man should live, and what kind of liberty man should have. And that's what the Enlightenment is all about. People are discussing enlightening ideas. The world is becoming more enlightened. It's no longer the age of kings and queens having a divine right. All of this is being questioned as people become more enlightened. So sorry, Henry, you're out. People are becoming more enlightened, and people are discussing how man should be governed. No longer can we just be governed by a king. So we've seen some of the great thinkers, René Descartes, Thomas Hobbes, John Locke, and here's another, J.J. Rousseau, or Jean-Jacques Rousseau. As the name implies, Jean-Jacques Rousseau was French, and Jean-Jacques Rousseau is famous for his discussions of government and his discussions of man and how man should be governed and what liberties man should have. And he talked about a contract between the citizen and the state, between man and government. This is called the social contract. If man is willing to live under a government, then man has some responsibility to obey the law, to obey the diktats of the government, but the government also has a responsibility to man and to society. And that's how a society can function, if everybody adheres to these principles and the right ideas of a social contract. And Jean-Jacques Rousseau, writing in the 1770s, 1780s, 90s, and at the turn of the century, was very influential as the French Revolution started to develop. So you can see, these aren't just abstract discussions. These philosophers, their ideas, are going to have a significant impact on political events like the French and American revolutions. And just like Rousseau has an influence on the French Revolution, John Locke has a great influence, as mentioned, on the founding fathers in America. After all, this statement here could be something that one of the founding fathers of America said when they wanted to throw off the rule of the British Crown. Don't unthinkingly follow authorities, whether intellectual or political or religious, and don't unthinkingly follow traditions or social conventions. Think for yourself. Look at the facts and try to base your views and behavior on how things actually are. That sums up the idea of the Enlightenment. Cast off religion, cast off authority, and think for yourself using reason. This idea of reason is very, very different than the age of witchcraft, isn't it? And here again is Thomas Paine, who wrote Common Sense, and this work, The Age of Reason, and where he used common sense and reason to determine arguments against monarchy and to determine arguments in favor of a new American republic. So this idea of reason and enlightenment was popular in philosophy and in politics, but it was also popular in economics. And this is the first time we see great economic thinkers. And the father or grandfather of all economic thinkers is Adam Smith. And his famous work is The Wealth of Nations. And in his writings, he looked into why some nations were wealthy and others were not. He looked into how markets worked, how economics worked, how business worked, how merchants worked. And this is some of the first writing on this idea of economics and the wealth of nations. And in addition to science, in addition to philosophy, politics, economics, we also have thinkers who ponder, where's man's place in the world? What can man know about the world? These are called existential questions. Where do we belong in the world? Is there a God? What's man's place in the world? What is right? What is wrong? Discussions of right and wrong are called ethics. And so we have these ethical philosophers like Kant and Hegel, who take a look at these questions. What can we know to be true? What can we perceive? What is right? So look at what Kant is saying here on the left. Understanding can perceive nothing. The sense can think nothing. And knowledge arises from united action. So we have to take all of our senses together. So clearly, using reason, we can see the Enlightenment was a significant period of European history.